Developer log, stardate 06092018. Let's talk menus today. So I've got my main menu here. This is fairly standard, fairly simple, but I'm going to walk you through what I did to kind of create this. And then I'm going to take you out and give you a more high-level overview of how this framework works, and then I'm going to go in and show you a new menu that I've been working on this week, which is the level select screen. So let me show you how this works first. I am going to run the game, drag it over here, maybe make it a little bigger. So we hit new game, and this actually allows you to choose which area that you're starting in now. We've walked through all of these areas in past devlogs, creating units for all these things and whatnot. So right now this menu is kind of a debug thing more than anything. I'm going to select Bodge, going to select the second area, and then it actually allows you to build your army. And in the real game, this build army is going to be your reserve of units that you've captured from past battles. But for now, build army is just a list of all the options that you have available, including some icons that are not actually correct, but we've got all the correct icons for these dudes, and you just click on them and you can recruit them, and they all just kind of gather in the corner down here. So that's our army builder. When you go back, you can actually still see your army. It's still pretty rough and crude, but it does all the things that it needs to do. So 2, then we go fight, and I'm going to turn my volume, and we come down like this. So here is the level 2. I can fight this guy if I want to. But I'm not here to show you the game. I'm here to talk about menus. So that's how it works. It's pretty crude. I've only been working on it this week and for a couple of days this week. So the menu system still has a lot of work to do, but I want to talk about a few of the core concepts that I have developed throughout this process. Some of these things are pretty obvious, obvious to anyone who's done much with Godot, like these containers. This is a VBox container with ironically, the horizontal lines is the VBox container because it aligns everything vertically. So all of these things, the logo and all of these buttons are in a VBox container so that they stay centered vertically. And then we have a center row, which I'm not sure if that's actually really needed, since I've got the version label here, center row. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is needed, but then the buttons are all also centered vertically. And yeah, that's how this works. Then I've got the version down here, which is just a text box. And then I've got a fade filter, which you can see in effect when I click any one of these buttons, it fades out, which I need to pull that out because I want to show you the next level of this, which is something I've done to make all of this tie together well. So if we go to the My Scene Switcher script, this is actually taken from a blog article that I read, that I will dig up the article and put that in the description if you want to see it. But this code is pretty much taken from that. This is introducing the idea of global variables so that you can swap scenes in and out but still maintain some sort of a state. So at some point I want to take this fade in and put the fade in into this module so that every time we change scenes, it just automatically does the fade in. I think that would be a good thing to do, but I haven't done it yet. So, and all this does is it keeps track of what the current scene is. And then when you change the scene, it releases that scene, loads the next scene, instances it, and adds it to the project root. So that's all this does. It's pretty simple, but it allows you to keep some variables around if you need to. So the reason we need to do this is because of the level select screen. So let me take you into that now. It kind of looks like a mess when we look at the 2D view. Everything's kind of layered on top of each other. It doesn't have to be this way. I could set it by default to show the choose an arena. So if we do that, we just have to turn off the arena controls. We have to turn off the scroll container. Actually, we probably have to do the level selector. It's pretty important which ones I turn off because I don't hide and show all of these containers in the code. I only hide and show some of them. So better make sure that this still works. That does work. And everything's showing, that's fine. Build army, cool. And also, I didn't show this earlier, but you can also change arena, which just takes you back to the screen. Your army stays there, which I might want to change, but yeah, that allows you to switch back and forth. So that's all functional. So let me show you how I connected all of this together. All of these are buttons. Well, okay, let's start at the beginning. These here are texture rect. And a texture rect is just an image that is a control, basically. So these are each control items, but they're control items that have an image. And these are actually in their own scenes because I have this border on them, this pixel border, which is a 9 rect. I don't remember what it's called, 9 patch rect. It's a 9 patch rect, and then we've got another 9 patch rect, which is its selected state. And then we have a very simple script in here that is just keeping track of whether it's selected or not. And if it gets keyboard focus or if it gets a hover from the mouse, then it just automatically shows the fancy border, and otherwise it hides it. So that's all that script does. It's pretty basic. It's bigger than it really needs to be. I should really consolidate this a little bit, but that's what that script does. And then from there, let me go back over to my 2D view here. So that's what those are. That is also what the level selectors are. So if I turn the level selectors back on, you can see they've got those fancy borders as well. And those will eventually be pictures of the bosses of the area, probably, rather than just 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll be the actual pictures of the bosses for each area. And then those all just, the only thing those do is those set a global variable. So when you click on one of these, it just sets the global variable in that scene switcher to whichever level you selected. So that's pretty easy. The arenas do the same thing. They just change a global variable so that when we jump into the game portion, the game knows which level to load. So that's pretty basic. And then the more complicated thing about this whole setup is navigating between the menus, which has to do with these arena controls. Let me show you those real quick. That's these buttons here. So these are just all connected to the pieces of functionality that hide and show things. So that's all these do, is they hide and show the appropriate things, except for fight, which changes the scene to the game scene. So these all just hide and show things. And then the army container, let me go into this scene. The army container has a item list, which is called unit list. And that has some signals. We also have this army container, which this was a little bit, I wasn't sure how to do this originally, and I'm still not sure if I'm doing it appropriately, but because I've never mixed these kind of control, well, so if we go in here to add, you can see we've got controls, which are green, and we've got nodes, which are blue. And I've never mixed the two. I've always kept the blue nodes separate from the green nodes. And this time, as you can see, I've got a blue node inside of my green node. And this seems to work just fine. I just put a YSort container into a margin, is it called margin? Margin container? Yeah. And it seems to work just fine. The YSort just is right here. I could probably, well, it's at 0 position. It seems to work fine anyway. So, and then all of my units, I just drop into this YSort container, and those units grab the center of this army container, and they all just try to move to that center. So that's all they do. And I could show you that code if I want to. It's right here. It's pretty simple. I just grab the children inside of the army container. I have a center pre-calculated, and then I use my steering control to steer the children towards the center of that container. So, and then I just move and slide. So pretty simple, which is nice. It's nice to keep things as simple as possible. Actually, this whole file is not that bad. I do have to parse my JSON because I've got a JSON file that has all of the unit data in it. That's how I'm populating my unit list. So that's how that's working. And this having JSON does have some interesting, it does make exporting a little bit more complicated, which I want to go over at some point. It's a problem that I had quite a bit when I was first starting to figure out how to export this game, was figuring out how to, well, it was breaking. Long story short, it was breaking because it didn't have the JSON. Godot does not by default export JSON files. So quick tip, I'm going to record a video soon with a lot more detail in how to export your Godot projects. But for now, just remember, if you use JSON, you're going to have to add some configuration to the export files. So that's how all of this basically works. I could explain a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of this file. This is a lot bigger than it really, I mean, it's not as complicated as it looks, which is nice. I just have to set up a lot of references to nodes, and then I do a lot of showing and hiding. Also, this is something that I found out recently. You have to, this mouse filter function, every control has a mouse filter function, and this controls basically whether the mouse is able to interact with this thing or not. So when the arena selector is showing, you have to be careful because arena selector in my tree here, arena selector is pretty close to the top, which means all of these other controls are just stacked on top of it. So even if you hide them, they're still there and they're still intercepting mouse events. So if I don't do this mouse filter, I guess, yeah, that one and this one, both. If I don't have these in here, then it seems to still be working, actually. I must have fixed that. So maybe I don't need that. But originally when I was doing this, when I had to ignore the mouse filters for those controls because they would intercept all of my hover events and I wouldn't be able to hover over these things. So that's a quick tip. Looks like I don't actually need that in this instance, which is nice. I'm not sure what I did to fix that, but it is good to know that I don't necessarily need that. If I show the army builder, I wonder if that'll give you build army, back, build army, back, change arena. No, it's not really breaking for me. So maybe I really don't need these mouse filters, but that is a handy thing to have in your tool belt. If you need it, you can actually turn off the mouse click and hover events by using this mouse filter. So trying to think if there's anything else that I should show you guys about this. So here's my scene switching. You can see I just set these global variables. We set arena to the arena identifier. We set the level to the selected level, and then we set the scene to the game scene. And there's no fade out, which is why I want to move the fade out to the scene switcher rather than having it just in this top level menu, this fade in script here. This is actually an instance, so I could just grab that instance and use it from the scene switcher, which is probably what I'll end up doing. So at some point I'm going to do that. But until then, this is what we've got, and it seems to work pretty well. It's not too buggy. I don't know why. Let me undo those comments. Let me see, because I don't think they were all starting out highlighted before. I'm not sure what I did there. I must have changed something in the instance here somehow. Oh yeah, I showed that. So let's not do that. Let's do this instead. Cool, so that looks better. One other quick tip that I'm going to tell you that I never really used until I was building the scene selector. You'll notice that every time I run this, it runs just this one scene. So I can test this scene really easily without having to go through the start screen, because if you run the current scene, which is this play scene, then that will run whichever scene is currently selected. So you can do this with anything. You can do this with my army builder too, and you can just test out the army builder without having to go there. It's a really handy thing. I've been pressing Command R, which is the shortcut for this, but it's a really good thing to use, especially when you're building interfaces that don't necessarily have a lot to do with other parts of your game. You can test it very individually, and it just makes it a lot quicker and easier to test it. And you can still press the regular play or Command B to run the full thing and test it that way. But when you're working on just one little thing like this, it's really handy to be able to just run this little piece and test it out without having to worry about the other pieces of the game. So that's one more little quick tip for you. I've also got some music that I've been working on that I want to talk about at some point. There's a whole bunch of stuff, guys. In case you haven't noticed, I tend to get lost in the weeds and like popcorn from one thing to another. So when I'm telling you about one thing that I did, I tend to get distracted. So that's something for me to work on to make these things a little more coherent. But yeah, I wanted to show you what I have learned with this level design stuff. Also, I made this a container, this army builder. This is just a generic container. And I don't know why I did that, if that was the right thing to do. But one thing that did trip me up at the beginning that I'd like to tell you about, this layout button here, with this container, I didn't really want it to get in the way, so to speak. I wanted it to be kind of, I didn't want it to get in the way of these margin containers inside. And I didn't realize when I started out that if you do like a bottom, I started out with bottom wide because I wanted them to be kind of stuck to the bottom, right? But when I did that, this container just becomes like a flat line. And then the coordinates for these margins change relative to the bottom of the screen, basically, which was not quite what I wanted. I could have made that work, but what I ended up doing instead was just going with full rect. And then this container basically acts as the entire screen, and the margins on these things go relative to the entire screen rather than just the very bottom of the screen. So that's a tip about doing layouts with Godot. If you have a container that you just kind of want to ignore, or if you're using these margin containers, you really have to watch out for what's going on above them and their parents before you worry about the actual margin container itself. Otherwise, you might end up adjusting the parent container and it'll screw up with everything you have underneath it. So that's one more little tip. And that's basically most of the things I've learned about UI design in Godot. It's really powerful. It has a lot of really good tools for doing stuff in here, and it makes a lot of things really easy, but it also is a little bit finicky to kind of get it all to work right. As you can see from just how this scene looks when you open it up. Even though it works and it looks decent while you're using it, it is kind of a mess to look at here. So yeah, that's my beginner tips into doing interface design in Godot. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot more about this in the coming months as I continue to build and refine these menu systems for this game. There's still a lot that we need this menu to do in the future. So I'm going to be working with it a lot, polishing it a lot, adding a lot of functionality, and I'm sure I will have more to say about this in the future. But for now, guys, thanks for coming and watching. Thanks for learning along with me with on how to better build things in Godot, and I will see you next week.